Hello and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. My name is Dan Allen and I am joined, as always, well not always, but fairly often, by James Walker. How's it going, James?
Hello, Dan. I'm very good. And this week we are talking about crowdsourcing as a way of funding, right? As one of the many ways you can try and get the stuff, the finance you need to make your project. And often crowdsourcing, which I really know very little about. I've never done it, so I'm really going to be interested to delve into it this week and find out a little bit more. But I think my impression is that, if you're looking to raise, when you're starting out, not huge amounts of money, that it can be a really interesting way. Have you ever crowdsourced anything, Dan?
I have a few times.
Tell me.
There's some short films, and I managed to get some people chip in from my YouTube. So I had a pretty decent YouTube subscriber base back in the day. Relatively, it's not great now. It was like 40,000 people, but as a teenager, I think pretty sound. So a few people from there, a few people from like film festivals that I managed to chip in, but then mostly it's like friends and family. Always feels like it's the biggest pool. So I definitely raised some decent money and got to use that for my film.
So was it the creative equivalent of when you asked people to like sponsor you to run the marathon?
That's how it felt. It was like, please chip in some money and you'll get I promised DVD copies, which probably financially didn't work out good for me at all. But I loved making DVDs. So I used to.
Was that when you were burning them yourself? You were literally
burning them myself, and I designed the artwork as well and print them directly onto the disc. So I had a printer that would print directly onto the writable DVD. It was so cool, and I designed the menu and
we had that back in Young Film Academy when we first started 16 years ago. All the films that were made by students, they would receive on DVD, and they had a similar weird design artwork and then print. And we had this whole DVD printer system, and it would be printing like 10 at a time, and all the trays would go. It was great.
So really cool.
And then they always look terrible. Because DVD, unless you're burning Blu-rays, basically, it's absolutely dross.
It is naff. It is terrible. I'm slightly scared to watch my new film, It Came From Below, is out on DVD in America, right? And there is a copy waiting for me somewhere in London, but I need to go and pick it up. And I've resisted the urge because I kind of don't want to put the DVD in.
Yeah,
because I'm aware that it's going to be standard definition. And not just that, I'm pretty sure there's a smaller color spectrum on standard definition, so you don't have the same range of pixels to choose from.
Plus, we're used to high def 4K, all that stuff. It's
right?
It's going to be brutal.
And my film is set in caves where most of the pixels are black.
It's darkness.
So I'm like, I don't know what you're going to be able to see when you put the DVD in, basically.
Wow.
So I'm nervous.
But when you crowdsourced it yourself, it was successful. You raised what you wanted to.
It raised some money that definitely ended up on screen, which was great. To be honest, a lot of the ideas were stuff that you could try and get by with asking around to some degree. But the reason we wanted to crowdsource is there were certain milestones we wanted to reach that were like, okay, if we got this, then we can do like one day with like a Steadicam and stuff like that. Okay, we can get a green screen studio for a day if we reach this milestone. And I think we reached a couple of those that really did elevate the film. And that was sort of the idea, is that like you were helping this film go to the next level, and you get like an executive producer credit and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, super cool. So that is exactly why we're covering this topic, because for certainly young creative filmmakers and people like that looking to actually make something, this is a potentially great way in. And we've got someone with us today who has kind of made that their thing, and that was their way into a very successful career now producing independent films and documentary films that are widely available on some amazing topics, including, as we will hear, one of the biggest franchises in the world. So we are very, very excited to have with us Hank Stars, the producer.
Welcome, Hank. How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. Very busy, which is good, I guess. But yeah, good. Lots of different projects going on. One's right in the middle of production, and then obviously most filmmakers, whether they're directors or writers or producers, have a few projects going at one time. As you guys know, it's kind of the only way to, as an independent, to progress really, is to have a lot of options at different stages, so that's always where
you're juggling. Well, listen, thanks, Hank, for taking the time out and coming to join us on Young Filmmakers Pod. So tell us a little bit, we're talking today about crowdsource funding, and then we'll go on to talk about sort of other things. But let's start with that. Sort of, I suppose, what was your first project that you funded using that mechanism, and talk us through that? How did that work?
Sure. I'll just say there's a couple of sort of elements to my involvement with crowdfunding. One is I've done it myself early on, but also I work with filmmakers who've crowdfunded films and then get them to a point where they've been shot, but they don't have any idea how to finish them or sell them or exploit them or collect the money or get them distributed or seen. So I've worked on a lot of crowdfunding projects, even though most of them haven't actually been mine. But yeah, the first one I did was, the first one was a music documentary about the Oxford music scene called Anyone Can Play Guitar. And that was crowdfunded on Indiegogo. It had obviously the bands, so the Oxford bands that we were making a film about, quite obviously Radiohead, Ride, Foals, whoever the other bands were at the time. And, this is quite a long time ago now. So crowdfunding was pretty new. But to be honest, it hasn't changed enormously. It has in some ways. But I think really the basic sort of rules for how you, not so much how you succeed as how you don't fail miserably, have probably kind of stayed the same, So
give us what sort of number were you trying to raise on that first documentary?
It wasn't an enormous amount. It was about, I think we were looking for about £10,000, and it was really just to pay for. I think we thought it was to pay for the music licensing, not knowing that music licensing actually costs about 5 times that.
Per song.
Yeah, so we shot it and everything, really. It was just for a little bit for post, but mostly for music and archive licensing, so like clips from bands on TV and masters and publishers. Because for those who don't know about music licensing, every time you license a track for any kind of show or film, there's always 2 sides to it. There's the master recordings, which is just the recording of the band doing the song. And then there's the publishing rights, which is often owned by a different person who owns who owns the masters. So you have to pay twice. So it's quite expensive. We were looking for that, and we raised about £15,000. And then we took that money and we got sponsored, because Anyone Can Play Guitar is the name of a Radiohead song. But we took the project to Fender Guitars and said, look, why don't you give us a load of guitars and some money, and we'll put your name, Fender Presents. So even though it was quite a small project, because Radiohead were involved and it had the word guitar in the title, they just gave us like 10 Fender guitars with which were branded for the film, and I think they gave us another £15,000 as well. And
wow,
we sort of put it all together and managed to.
And what did you do with the guitars? Did you sort of offer them out as a reward? Or
we sort of auctioned them off, kind of thing. We used them in competitions. We got on 6 Music by taking one on and having, Sean Keaveney gave it away as part of some competition, as part of the press for the film. We used them in various. We kept a couple, obviously. So with the crowdfunding, I mean, really, the biggest takeaway I've got from crowdfunding, the first film was a music documentary. The second one was a film about the making. It was about the extras and supporting cast in the original Star Wars. So anyone who pretty much had worn a helmet or had their face covered in the original film, we made a documentary about that. And it was really about how being part of that huge cultural behemoth had affected their lives, because they all did Comic Cons and signings, and they'd kind of, it really cast a long shadow over sort of their whole lives. So it was about them, but it was also about Star Wars. And in both,
what was that doc called?
It's called Elstree 1976, and you can still see it on Netflix in the USA, I think, and you can see it on Sky in the UK. Basically,
super cool.
Yeah, it is good.
I'm a big Star Wars nut, so
you should check it out. It's not all about Star Wars, so the director keeps telling everybody. Still 6 months later. But
that's not a selling point for me, though, Hank. Now you're telling me there's less Star Wars in it. What's going on here?
That's right.
Well, it's got the original, but there's a big bit about the original Boba Fett, isn't there?
Yeah,
and sort of him on the signing tour, and then of course there's a new Netflix series all about Boba Fett and all of that stuff.
Yeah. And a couple of the guys have passed away actually since we made the film. Darth Vader, who threatened to sue us because he didn't like the interview.
You were going to get sued by Darth Vader.
Yeah,
that's something for your CV.
Nearly sued. Like that, but that's right. Yeah,
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. He was a strange man. Yeah, in fact, recently his family, I guess, auctioned off a lot of his memorabilia and possessions, and somebody sent me a link to it. And there was a copy of the film and a letter from me inviting him to a screening, which was part of the auction. Letter from producer.
How much did that get at auction?
Really, it was like 20 quid or something.
What if someone says, "I've got a letter"?
Yeah,
thanks, Darth.
Said, like, "Hi,
to Darth Vader.
Okay, come along to this screening," and then it had my name and address and like number on it on the auction website. So I got in touch with them and said, "Look, can you just blank out my phone number, please?"
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, it'd be like, what's Hank's phone number worth? Probably at least 20 quid. Do you know what I mean, for a direct line?
Exactly. Direct line to a producer's got to be worth 20 quid, right?
I know a little bit about Darth Vader because I heard that he thought it was going to be his voice that was going to be in the film when he was initially cast.
Yeah, he did. Of course,
yeah.
We all know he talks like that, so because he's from the West Country. He's written a brilliant autobiography called, I've forgotten what it's called. It's got a stupid name, but there's a whole chapter about how he got overcharged for some double glazing. He was always very preoccupied with sort of income and money.
Can you move a fraction closer to the microphone?
Sure,
it's so good. We're not.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So anyway, we shouldn't talk about Darth Vader for the whole thing, but great fellow. So I think the trick with crowdfunding really is there's a couple of things to think about. Definitely if you have a hook, you're always going to do a million times better. So if you've got a Star Wars or a Radiohead or whatever it is that people are going to, because the trick is to pull in people who aren't just your friends or friends of your friends. So it worked for us on those occasions. The first one was £15,000. The second one made about 50 grand. But the thing is, if you want to say make your own short film, or I don't know, just crowdfund your mate's music video, or just make it, rustle up a few hundred quid or a few £1,000s, you can definitely do that. And it's a different kind of thing. But really, the biggest mistakes that people make with crowdfunding, and they make them over and over again, if you go onto any crowdfunding websites and just browse around, which is always good fun because there's actually lots of good stuff on there. So Kickstarter, Indiegogo, there's lots more of them now. There's crowdfunders for books and writers and all kinds of stuff. But the two mistakes that people always make is they try to raise too much money, so they make their target much too high, and even worse than that, they price their rewards way, way too high. So they see it as a sort of a charity rather than what it is, which, for instance, with a film on Kickstarter, it's kind of a pre-sale marketplace. You're selling your film in advance to people. So, if you've got a short film and you'd say to people, okay, you can buy into my groovy short film, my cool zombie short film that I'm going to make, and I'll give you a copy of the film. And in order to have that privilege, maybe put your name on it, I'm going to charge you £50. Then people can just go on iTunes and go, well, look, I can download a short film for £3.49. Why would I pay you 50 quid? That's just ridiculous. And it's the same with the feature film. People charge, £80, £100 for the pleasure of having a download or a Blu-ray. It's just ridiculous. What you want to do is you just want to sell people the film for something around about, what they would be able to buy it for, on Amazon, really.
Oh, so you're literally saying, for instance, sort of £20 gets you a copy of the film, but you're buying it in advance.
Exactly right. That's what you're doing, and that's the way to keep your prices reasonable. Because, and actually not a physical copy because that's too difficult to deliver. It's expensive, and there's lots of postage. So what we did on the second film, on the Star Wars film that I mentioned, Dan, is I can't remember exactly. It's still up there, I think. I'm pretty sure we sold a stream or a download of the film for 10 quid. So, and we sold a lot of those. They were by way the most that we sold. And also you can sell them all the way, all around the world because people can download them and you don't have to mail them. And that's the trick. Sometimes you can charge more for unique events. You can take people out to dinner, and you can offer like props from the film, or you can come up with some really cool stuff that you can charge a bit more for. But the main thing is to have a really low level starter reward that lots of people can afford. And in terms of what you're going to actually make, you want to try and make around about 30% of what you're trying to raise in the first few days. Because if you can do that from your friends and family and connections and social media, then people immediately see the project as a success, and then it will start to attract more people to it. I think on Indiegogo there's a really good sort of PDF spreadsheet of rules for crowdfunding. I think they probably all have tips and hints now. So if you're doing it, it's worth going, and having a look and just reading that stuff.
And so for a young, creator out there who wants to crowdfund their project, potentially is looking this as a potential route, can we just take a step back a second and sort of do first principles? So like crowdfunding is the idea that you offer rewards to people who give you money in advance so that you can do the thing that they then get the reward from. Is that?
Yes, that's basically it. Right. So you're selling them something that hasn't been created yet. You're selling them a concept, an idea, a brilliant notion, so that they can buy it. And then once you've made it, they'll receive their reward. They'll receive that object or that thing. Often they'll get a credit if it's a film. They'll get a credit on it. You might even sell producer credits or associate producer credits. But generally, you're selling them something. You're selling them an actual thing, or an invite to a screening, or whatever it's going to be.
And what's the rule? Is there some rule like you have, for your money to be taken, the project has to hit its target, i.e. it's going to have to happen, as opposed to sort of someone giving a bit of money and then the thing never happens anyway?
All of the sites are different. So Kickstarter, you don't get the money unless you hit your target. So that's by far the most visible crowdfunding site, and it's the most effective just because it's the biggest. But if you're looking to raise £1,000 to make a short film, or £500 to make a short film, to pay for everybody's food and have a great time and make something cool, then unless you raise that £500, you don't get anything. But with other sites like Indiegogo, which is also good, you could have a target of £10,000, and even if you only raise £1,000, you'll still get the money. But you can't collect the money. With Kickstarter. So in a way, Kickstarter is more attractive to people because they know that, if you don't hit your target, you're not going to get the money. So if it doesn't do well, because basically the person who donates and buys the reward, their money only comes out of their card or their bank when the target is hit. So if the thing doesn't do well, they don't pay out. You know what I mean?
So how does it work on Indiegogo? So if you're trying to raise 10 and you only raise 1, and I've given, let's say, £100 to this, and that therefore that thing is never going to happen because they need 10, but they've only got 1, does that leave me in danger?
Well, it kind of. I mean, when you sign up, when you buy stuff on these websites, you're always it's always a risk. And they tell you the risk. So the people who are donating, whether it's your mum and dad, your friends or strangers, know that their £10 or their £100 could be lost. They know the thing could be not made. Because if you go to those crowdfunding sites, you'll see there'll be a pitch where people will talk about their project and maybe show some artwork and just try and persuade people to fund it. And then at the end, it'll outline the risks for donors. And one of the risks will be you might lose all of your money. Because it can't be guaranteed that this thing's going to be made. You don't enter into a legal contract. You're just taking a punt on it. But most of the stuff gets made in one.
And I suppose I can imagine when you're dealing with Star Wars, for instance, as the topic of documentary, that's got such a fan base that, was it a much bigger response than you hoped when you first put out the crowdfunding? Like, is it quite exciting? Do you check in every hour and see where you are?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, you do. You check in every hour. And you spend a lot of time promoting it. You're going on social media. You're emailing everybody. You're telling them to talk to people. You make a nice, maybe you might get some artwork done or a poster, or you do a little pitch, a video pitch. But yeah, it was very exciting. And there are lots of Star Wars fans, and you might get the odd sort of celebrity donor. And once it gets past a certain point, because I think we shot a trailer, so we went into the basement of a theatre in Swindon, where the sound recordist lives, and it's a great place. It's called the Wyvern Theatre, and it's got an old basement all filled with pipes and it kind of looks like a sort of submarine or a spaceship. And we had some people dressed up as stormtroopers, and various characters from Star Wars, and then we just shot them kind of almost in like an 8mm film look, like a really grungy look, like it was behind the scenes footage. And then we made a trailer out of that, and it was really nice. So a lot of people got excited about it. And that was before.
I think I remember seeing something about it where it's almost like there was a stormtrooper like having a cigarette.
Exactly, or drinking a cup of coffee or eating a sandwich. And actually that footage ended up in the film, as kind of B-roll. It worked really well. So we had the teaser, and then what happened for us, because it was Star Wars and because it did well quite quickly, we got some traditional press. So we actually got onto the BBC News website. We got into the Times newspaper in print, so if you can go from sort of just online into kind of legitimate, or I suppose what you might call legitimate press, that really, really helps your sort of outreach,
And I know what many of our listeners will be thinking is, if I want to get a few Stormtrooper suits,
yeah.
Where do I go to get a few Stormtrooper suits?
Well, actually, Stormtroopers have their own suits. Star Wars fanatics who might dress as Darth Vader or a Stormtrooper or Boba Fett or, Greedo, they have their own kit. And they wear it to Comic-Cons, and they wear it to charitable events, and they belong to squadrons of like-minded people who meet up and do stuff. There's a whole subculture of people who have a very nice.
Who knew?
Yes,
amazing.
Yeah.
So he says you contacted some of them and said, "Come on, guys, get yourself along to Swindon and get in the basement, and let's shoot you with a bit of 8mm."
See you at the screening. You'll end up in the film. It was great, So yeah, there was tons of them. But that's the trick when you've got like a big draw or a big hook like that with crowdfunding. I think the challenge.
Can I just want to ask you about that word hook, because from a producer's point of view, I think I used to hear that a lot when I was first starting out in the industry and I was a young person. And it's like everyone talks about this hook, they've got a great hook. This needs a hook. And I always kept on saying to people, define a hook for me. And I don't think I ever quite got the right answer. So what do you think when people says a hook, you need a hook? What do you think you mean by that?
Well, in the case of crowdfunding documentaries, you need something that's, as many people as possible can recognize. So in that case, it's a band, that everyone's heard of, or a film that loads of sci-fi fans love. So your hook is Star Wars or your hook is Radiohead. I think when it comes to something a little bit more tenuous or obscure, I think a hook is just a really cool, strong idea. It's almost like when you're talking about films, it's like a high concept idea. Like, a huge meteor is just about to hit the Earth. What are we all going to do? A hook is just something that really grabs people in a very few words. For me, that's what a hook is. So someone goes to me, I've got this great film, and there's this guy, and he lives in a shed, and he's got some shoes, and he's got a cat, and then he goes out and he goes to Tesco's. I'm kind of like, well, where's the hook?
I'm sold. I mean, where do I sign?
Yeah, that's right. But if you say to me, this is a film about my grandma who's a werewolf, then I go, oh, grandma's a werewolf, So I think a hook just means something that gets your attention in a very simplistic way. That's what it is for me, anyway.
Super cool. And in terms of rewards, what did you guys offer? Do you remember for Elstree 1976 on your? Yeah,
good question. We had a really good replica Boba Fett helmet. That was one of the most expensive rewards. That a guy in America made perfect replicas of the Boba Fett helmet from the film, really perfect, and those went for about £800 each, I think. But generally, it was just the film itself for £10. We did a special edition Blu-ray, which was a bit more expensive. We had a really good screening at Elstree Studios, in the very studio where the Millennium Falcon was situated, where we set up a huge screen and invited everyone into the big hangar of a soundstage to watch the film where Star Wars was shot, with some of the...
Brilliant.
And that was fantastic. I mean, people loved that. We had a really nice alternate poster by a guy called Dan Mumford, who you might have seen his work on the most recent Wicker Man poster. It's very sort of black and white and beautiful screen print type work. He did us a really nice poster. Tried to be fairly inventive. The guy who wrote the soundtrack did a cassette, like an old style cassette of the score, and that was one of the rewards, with all the sleeve notes that me and him and John wrote. So we quite varied, but all connected to the film, and nothing that was too difficult or expensive to deliver.
Wow. And I assume you smashed your target for Elstree 97.
We did. I can't remember what the target was. I think we made about £50,000. Does that sound about right to me? I can't.
And does it work like if your target is, let's say, 50,000 and then you just keep raising and you keep selling, do you just keep going? I mean, can you go, well, actually, it's taken 100 or whatever?
You can, and people often do. And what you do is you have what's called stretch goals. So if your target is £50,000, then you say, okay, if we hit our target, we'll then offer some new stuff. We'll offer these new, like these great T-shirts, or what they call a stretch goal, which just means another thing that gets another award that is triggered by the target being hit. People do that a lot, and that's the trick as well about keeping. Whether your target's £100 to make a film with your mates, or whether it's £100,000, to make a horror film with more mates. It's basically you've got to be really careful about what your target is, because you want to hit it. Because the sooner you hit it, the more successful the film will appear, and the more people will then go, "Oh, everyone's buying into that. I want some of that."
Yeah, super interesting.
Yeah, there's some.
And were there any
marketing thing that I don't know?
Were there kind of downsides? Because I mean, at the moment, it sounds like a great model. I mean, you guys were doing something super cool. You had this really great idea. You're putting up great rewards. It all sounds like honey and roses. So I suppose, were there, from a producer's point of view, are there downsides to that? And what were they, if so?
No, there are downsides to it. I mean, on a very practical level, it's really hard work. On the two crowdfunders I was intimately involved with, we were both working 7 days a week, because you get a lot of questions from the donors. You get a lot of you have to keep posting and on social media, and you have to keep up with everything, and you have to just keep reaching out and trying to grab and contact people. So there's definitely, ours ran over a month. It's a month of really, really hard work, but we were prepared for that. I think the big downside for crowdfunding is that on a more business level, sort of industry level, I don't know if this is very interesting, but basically what tends to happen is that a project will start small. All of the crowdfunding projects I've worked on, the one that's just finished and got into Sitges, and then what's the horror film festival in London? I can't even remember. It's a film called Pennywise, The Story of It. And it's a documentary about the original TV show of It with Tim Curry that was on in the 90s. And it's got Pennywise the Clown, and it was a big draw. That one's done a couple of festivals, being released in America this year and then the UK next year. And the problem that always causes is that your donors get upset if they have to wait a long time. So they understand that the film has to be made, and then they're going to get a copy of it. But sometimes for business reasons, you have to hold back the film, and you can't give it to the people who've paid for it until it's screened at a festival, or you've sold it to a distributor, or you've done an American deal. So it can be very difficult sometimes, because they get really, mostly they're really, really nice, but it only takes 1% of people to be very angry, and that can be difficult because you're constantly dealing with them. It's kind of understandable in a way, because, they feel like they should get it all first. So I think when you're running a crowdfunding thing on that level, you need to make sure that everybody who's donating gets something before the general public get it, even if it's just a private screening that you invite them all to. So it's that side.
So interesting.
That's the very hard.
And after Elstree, did you go on, the projects that you were producing after that, did you continue to use that model, or did you move away from the crowdsourced model? What
I found was that there was a lot of good projects on crowdfunding. I didn't want to do it myself because it was a lot of work and time. And, what I ended up doing was looking for projects that needed help. Because after I finished the Star Wars film, Elstree, I sold it all around the world, got a sales agent, made a certain amount of sales. You can still see it, and it went into profit, and the rest of the film was funded by investors, and they all got paid back and got their investment back, plus a profit. So I knew that there was good films out there that were being made but couldn't be finished. So I just had a look around. I found Being Frank, the Chris Seavey story, which is the Frank Sidebottom film, which was crowdfunded and had done very well. And then I helped the guy finish it, and we sold it to Altitude, who's a really good UK distributor, one of the best.
So you actually found Being Frank was it you literally came across it on the platform?
Yeah, that's right. I think he might have contacted me actually and said, I saw that you did Elstree. Can you help me out with this? I don't know what to do. I don't know how to finish it. I don't know how to sell it, But there was a few others, the Pennywise documentary, RoboDoc, which is currently in production, and the Robert Englund story, which is a Freddy Krueger actor, story of his life. They were all crowdfunded and really good films, which I joined after they'd been going for a couple of years and helping them finish and complete them and deliver them and sell them and get them distributed and seen around the world.
Wow. So you became the sort of the crowdfunding whisperer. You were like the guy they came to. You were like, we've got a problem. You've got a problem. You've got a crowdsource problem. Get Hank stars.
That's right. Kind of. I think so. Yeah. Just because there's that point where everyone gets stuck, where you're suddenly thrown into the industry proper, and you don't want to kind of have your film be wasted. Great thing you spent years making. That you want to sell it for what it's worth. And that's a hard thing to do.
Well, I think that's really interesting. Actually, I hadn't thought about this. That there must be this point where, because crowdsource funding to some extent is kind of like an extension of the phrase we use, friends, fools, family. When you're starting off as a young creative and you want to make something, you need a small amount of cash, and often friends, fools, and family will give you something. And crowdsource funding is almost like a slightly bigger version of that.
Yes.
But at the point where you then sort of go and make it, I suppose the difference is, if you're working on a purely commercial model, almost you have to have sold it almost, don't you, before you even make it.
Yeah.
Whereas with those models, you get to make it because of the larger network of friends, fools, family, or crowdsource. But then there comes this point, if you do make it and it's good, so it starts to then move from that into almost like a hobby project. And it moves from that to become a commercial thing. And that's the jump that you are helping these films make, right?
Yeah, exactly right. That's what it is. It's going from being a sort of a cottage industry hobby thing to actually being something you can sell, within the industry properly and get seen and distributed around the world. But there's certain things that need to be done with films, particularly all the paperwork, which is boring, but insurance, all the deliverable paperwork that you need, and that's just something that filmmakers don't tend to know anything about. All of the contracts and all of that stuff. It's something that release forms. It's something that people, when they start, why should they know about that kind of stuff? But it's good to learn about it if you can, because
well, for sure, I think it's super important. And a lot of young creators get into it because you want the fun of making the thing and the creative there. But in the end, if we're going to make a living out of this, you do have to deal with that business side of things. So, Can you give us a sense of the kind of things as a producer that you're doing on a movie? Like, you're talking about things like release forms. These are kind of words that may not mean a lot to young people. Can you just unpick some of that for us? What are these things?
Yeah, sure. I guess in a way, it's good to get into the habit of having a piece of paper that is connected to everybody who is in your film. So if even if you're making a short film and you've got a couple of friends to act in it, you've got a guy to shoot it on the camera, and you've got someone to maybe record the sound or something like that, if you can just get hold of some really simple contracts that just say, I'm going to be the sound recordist for my friend's film, signed by me, signed by him. He'll give me £1 and some sandwiches, right from the start. And the actors that say, I'm happy to appear in this film and I don't mind it being exploited around the world. And there's lots of resources online where you can go and download contracts or simple release forms. And really, when you sell a film, you have to, every name you see on the screen, there's a piece of paper behind that name. If it's a documentary and you've interviewed someone, you've got a release form, which is just a form that says, I agree to be in this film for £10, or I agree to appear free, or I agree to do certain things for a certain amount of money. And it kind of sounds boring and tedious, but once you have a few little templates, and it's only half a page of text really, and you've got something in writing, if you get in the habit of doing that early on, it really saves you a lot of pain down the line. And like I say, there's lots of resources. I think you can get. I'm trying to think where people find templates, but there's definitely places, isn't there? I mean, maybe somewhere like Shooting People might have it.
I think the struggle actually is that it's often you don't even know what it is you need.
Yeah.
So if you knew the name of the thing you need, you could find it. But at the time, you don't even know what you need. Yeah, that's the difficult thing.
A contract or an agreement, I guess it's just because the thing is, what you can do is, this might sound crazy, but you can just make something up and both sign it. So you can literally just print out a paragraph that just says, I'm going to make a short film in my garage, and my friend James is going to come along and he's going to play the lead. Okay. And we both agree that this is fine. And once the film's made, we're going to try and sell it, or it's going to be shown in some festivals or whatever. We're allowed to exploit it. And then you just both sign it. It doesn't really have to be a contract. It's just getting in the habit of having something really simple in writing, even if it's just an exchange of emails, because that can be a contract. So if you send a contract to your friend saying, look, I'm shooting a film on Sunday, do you want to come down and be an extra? We'll give you some food. And they say, yeah, sure, I'll come along. I'd love to do that. That is a form of contract. If they later then say, I didn't want to be in that film, it was not fair, you should have paid me £100, you can say, well, hang on, here's this email. You said you were happy to do it. So that's really, it can be as simple as that. It could be as simple as just an exchange of emails where you just ask them to do something and they say yes, and that's a good way of starting, just to get something in writing, or even a text. You can text someone and say, I'm shooting a film, come down, be an extra. They go, yeah, groovy, we'd love to be there. Excellent. Okay, you've got a screenshot of that text. That's your contract,
Yeah, no, and I think this is so good for young creatives to hear, because, my first experience was slightly the necessary paperwork and permissions thing, and I think this is quite a common thing. Was actually, so first short film I made was called One Small Leap, and it was about a guy. We built a trailer in a studio that was like the moon landing. It was something like the moon landings, and we had the guy from Gladiator who was playing. It was enormous. He was like 7'1" and about 38 stone, and he does some stuff in this trailer, and it was a 3-minute short film, but it used a track that was number one in 1969 by an artist called Merle Haggard. And it was a really it was called Okie from Muskogee, and it had just the right vibe to it. So we made this film, it was great, all this stuff, and we started entering it to festivals, and festivals really enjoyed it. So we wanted it to play in all these festivals. So the festivals started asking us for things like music clearance permissions, and then TV channels wanted to play it. And we're like, what is a music clearance permission? And it was like, well, you've got this track Okie from Muskogee. Yeah. Someone owns it. What's the... And I remember at the time, that was my first foray. It was like, and I was probably 22. And I was like, okay. So I'm starting... I remember phoning up like various record labels and saying, do you own Okie from Muskogee? And they were like, well, I think we own the publishing rights, but I think that we used to own this, but now I'm not sure. Oh my goodness. Boy, did it teach me. Like, you've just got to get this stuff. You've got to know before you start, because otherwise you make something. A lot of young filmmakers, for instance, will put music on their film, and then they even try and put it on YouTube. And now YouTube will automatically detect that it's a Beyonce track, and it will essentially not allow them to upload it to YouTube. So just being aware of this basic stuff. And I think what you're saying is get into the habit of just having a bit of paper between you and your mate is a great starting point. Gets you in your brain thinking that way.
Just thinking, that's exactly right. It's just that whole notion of the sort of concept of it, And and when you get further on down the line, actually, there's a lot of resources for music, particularly, where you just don't need to use very expensive tracks that are licensed. There's some fantastic, what we call library music, which you can just pay a small amount of money for. There's a website called Audio Network, and it's just amazing. They've got thousands and thousands of tracks. You can just type in something like that says Merle Haggard Country and Western, and you'll get a beautiful bit of music, that you can just pay a small amount for, and it's licensed forever to use anywhere in the world, because your film or your show is never going to live or die on one track. Because that's the other thing, is that I'm sure you thought.
We did. I remember that. It's never going to, the film is ruined.
But you probably could have got a groovy country and western sounding tune that sounded a bit like that song. No one would have known.
That was exactly what we ended up doing. So we ended up pulling the track off the movie, and then we got a friend of mine who was a musician, and we basically said, can you more or less copy that? But it was different. So he made a completely different track. He made it from scratch. We paid him to do it, not very much. And then we used it, and then no one ever told him.
Exactly. That's perfect. And the thing is, you talk about trying to clear a music track for a film, and how complicated it was, even just on that short for one song. And there's people who do that job full time on a film. The music supervisor will deal with all of that and track down especially when you're making a documentary or a music documentary, it can get really complicated, to figure that all out. But it's just the concept of permission. If you're going to make a film somewhere, there's people who've gone onto the streets of London with fake guns to shoot a fun little gangster film, and got arrested, and thrown into prison for a day because they didn't permission, or they didn't talk to the council, they didn't try and find out if they were allowed to do it. And there's lots of other scenarios where you're allowed to have a crew, I think, as big as 4 people, aren't you, on the street? You don't need permission, So you can do lots of cool stuff without getting it, but it's just knowing. Because if you're thinking of being a filmmaker in some sort of way, your mind is going towards, well, maybe I would like to actually try and do this. It is good fun and it is very creative, but there is also a lot of, like all creative industries, there's a sort of business paperwork side to it, that if you learn a bit about it, your life will be a lot less painful in the future.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's potentially a role, there might be young people listening to this who could, you know what, that sounds great to me. Like, I'm actually don't want to be in front of the camera. I'm not interested in storytelling particularly, but the business side of stuff, that really floats my boat. And is this even a thing? And it is, right? There's people who make, people like yourself who make a livelihood going and producing movies where you're doing all of this stuff behind the scenes that a lot of viewers wouldn't even know happens.
Yeah, totally. And it's really fun and satisfying, when you raise a bit of money to make your film, or you get the right cast member, or you sell your film to a distributor in America, or those are all great, fun, exciting moments. It's there's hard work to it, like there is any job, but it's really cool. I love it.
So, Hank, I was wondering. Obviously, you talked already about making sure that the project you're working on, that you're going to create a Kickstarter for, or a crowdfunding project for, has some kind of wider appeal. So it's not just your nan that's chipping in money.
Yeah.
But I wondered whether that thought process and what that appeal is changes between doing a crowdfunding versus if you're going to either a sales agent or a potential financier. Like, do you approach it differently?
Yes, very.
Okay.
I think really, to be totally honest, if you're approaching a financier or a sales agent, whatever idea you have, and this is a very industry notion, sales agents, finance, people who are actually trying to raise money to get them to give you a lot of cash. Whatever you're going to pitch them is just going to have to be a lot more conservative, and it's going to have to be a lot more like something else they've seen before. That's just what the industry's like. So,
interesting.
If you're doing one of the great advantages of crowdfunding is you can do something really crazy. If you want to just get a tiny drone to fly around your office and fly around you, while you're in the garden digging up the weeds and make a film out of it, you can do that on crowdfunding. And if you try and pitch that to a sales agent, they'll go, I don't understand about your tiny drone. So I think crowdfunding, and it's one of the things I probably should have mentioned, is it gives you a lot more creative freedom. And don't forget that if you're crowdfunding something, all the money's yours, you can do whatever you like with it, So I think that, it is a very different world in a way. And often, you're kind of appealing to a more, in a way, the general public are a lot more imaginative and forgiving and creative than like film executives are. You can pitch something on crowdfunding that's actually quite out there, and it might do really well.
Well, you see like the comments are out on YouTube where people almost complain of films being too similar.
Yeah, that's right. Of course.
And it's those people that are going, "Oh, thank goodness, this is."
I think
really
people often are. Yeah, they go, "God, this is," and people go on crowdfunding. Often when people fund your program, you can tell what else, your film. You can tell what else they funded, because you can go and look at them as a funder and see. And often they'll have funded lots of really interesting, cool stuff. They just do it because they really enjoy it, and they want to see interesting things get made. They might go, oh, look, this guy's making a documentary about paperclips. No one else is going to do that. I think that's really cool. I'm going to fund it. So I'm
interested.
Yeah, that's right. I think, and actually, the thing about crowdfunding is if you're thinking of doing it on any level, it really just go and look at what's out there and what other people are doing. Look at what's successful. You can see what stuff's made money and what hasn't. You can browse through it for ages. It's really good fun. It's interesting, and you'll pretty quickly pick up an idea for what people like and don't like.
And talking of paperclips and your next documentary work, which I assume is not on paperclips. So tell us a little bit, Hank, sort of stepping back, about how you as a producer choose projects, because I know you've worked on some fantastic projects that look amazing to me. So what have you been working on and have had out recently, and how do you go about choosing? Because there's lots of choices of what you could focus on. How do you make that choice?
Yeah, it's a really good question. People bring stuff to me. Sometimes I'll create projects myself. Sometimes I'll do stuff because I really personally love it. I'll just go, okay, it was like the Frank Sidebottom thing. He was just a really interesting outsider artist, a really fantastic character who I loved, and I really wanted to get involved with that. Talking about the Star Wars film, sometimes as a producer, you, I suppose, can be a little bit cynical, because originally what we were going to do after that film did so well and sold around the world, and is still on Netflix in the USA, was to just make a sequel called Elstree 1979. And so we started doing that, and we were thinking about, okay, well, we'd focused on the extras and the supporting cast in Elstree 1976. What should we do for 79? We'll do, in fact, we were going to do a trilogy. We were like, okay, we'll do Star Wars, then we'll do The Empire Strikes Back, and then we'll do Return of the Jedi. And for the second second one, Elstree 1979, we decided, okay, we're going to focus on the stunt community in the film, just that film, The Empire Strikes Back. So we started talking to stunt guys, and we raised a little bit of money, and we very quickly realized that not only wasn't the main stunt guy who'd done a big stunt where Luke Skywalker gets blown backwards out of a window, he didn't want to do it. There was about 4 other guys who were like stormtroopers, and we talked to them. They were like, "Yeah, was that the one where we ran around with the white suits and the teapots on our heads?" Because the thing about stunt guys is they just do millions and millions of jobs. They can't remember what they did in 1979. They can't remember what they did in 2009. We quickly realised we're not onto a winner here. We'd made it far too narrow.
Yeah.
So actually, that died a little bit, because basically, to answer the question, really what I said was, okay, Elstree 1976 has done well, let's just do it again, but slightly different, which is something producers do quite a lot. Because if you've had a success, why not just try and replicate it? It's not, it seems crass and kind of opportunistic, but in a way, what else have you got to go on, So
absolutely.
Yeah, so we started with that sequel, didn't work out. It kind of laid around for a couple of years, and then we were like, okay, we'd met a few stunt guys, and they were really interesting. They were just hilarious guys that made all the big, huge franchises in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Star Wars, Rambo, all of the Bond films, which is all fantastic, And so we thought, well, let's just make a documentary about the British stunt guys in Hollywood. And we call it Hollywood Bulldogs, the rise and falls of the great British stuntman. And we got Ray Winston to narrate it. And that's actually out on Monday on general release in the UK. But it's
fantastic.
It's been on BritBox for a few months. And it's sold around the world, So the one project came out of an idea to go, okay, yeah, we'll just copy what we did before, make some more money. And then it fell apart, and then it became something new, And as an independent producer, filmmaking is a bit like that. You're always sort of chancing your arm here or there, The project that I'm right in the middle of now, which is a history of modern British cinema, started off as a documentary about a film producer called Michael Dealey, who, James, as you know, is a friend of your colleague Ed's. And I read his book, which is called Deer Hunters, Blade Runners and Blowing the Bloody Doors Off, because he's the producer of Deer Hunter and Blade Runner and The Italian Job. Great producer in the 70s and 80s in the UK. I wanted to make a film from his book, got in touch with him via a friend. He agreed to do it, and then he was too unwell. He became very unwell, couldn't do interviews. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do with this? And then I thought, okay, I know, let's make it more like Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, which is a American film about the sort of 70s industry, which has got all your Coppolas and your Spielbergs and all that in it. And I thought, we'll just do a British version of that. So it changed into that. And then we were like, well, we can't do that. It's a feature film. Let's do a series. The Stunt Guys film had done well. So we said to the people who bought that, do you want a series? And they were like, yeah, sure. So now I'm making a series, which was really
brilliant. Well, I think what's so instructive, we often on this pod have talked to so many people in so many different areas of the industry, and everyone is saying some little version of that, really, which is, weirdly enough, your career, your development, how the life works often is you sort of get to a point and you don't know what the next point is, but it sort of comes from something to do with that last point, and then it branches off, and then it branches off. So actually nobody has a clear map of where their creative career is going to go. It almost just finds its own meandering way because of what you've just done spawned something else that spawned something else. And often it's not the thing you thought it would be, right? It's something kind of different.
And that's the whole notion of having, now as a producer, I've probably got, I don't know, whatever it is, 10 projects in various stages of development. If you're a writer or you want to be a director or you want to be any kind of creative, the worst thing you can do is to just have one idea. It doesn't matter how passionate you are about it. You've always wanted to make this film about a zombie dog. It's brilliant. He's called Rover. He's a zombie dog. It's brilliant. And it might be the best film that was ever made. But you'll often be in a position where people get, yeah, I like that. What else have you got? And when they ask you,
Yeah.
and they ask it all the time, you guys know that. Daniel's a writer and a director. James, you know it as a writer. You'll be in a place and people go, yeah, I like that, but I'm not really looking for a zombie dog at the moment. What else have you got? So it only has to be a sentence. You can go, oh, well, actually, also I've got one about, Boris bikes that turn into robots, or I've got, a different one about, whatever it is. Because if you're a creative person, you'll have lots of ideas anyway. Don't discard them, just write them down on your foot, put them on your phone. It could be the simplest thing in the world. And sometimes people will go, oh, I like that one. Let's see what we can do with that, So it's
so interesting.
Really good to not focus on one thing.
And
do you have, sorry, I was just going to say, do you have in your roster of projects a mixture of what you would deem safer projects and maybe slightly more out there projects? And if so, is that a good balance to have? Or do you think in all of your projects, you wouldn't invest in it if you didn't think it had potential, I suppose, anyway? So maybe that kind of avoids it.
The latter, really, because, for me, that hook that you mentioned earlier, James, what is a hook? For me, everything has to have that hook and it has to have a commercial potential. Because basically there's so many millions of people out there who are selling ideas, and there's not a lot of money to go around. So you've got to have something. I mean, you can have a really personal passion project that you just sort of make for nothing. People can do that and they do it all the time. But as a producer, I can't really, someone who's making a living out of it, I haven't really got the luxury of just developing stuff that's I'm sort of, kind of is something that I just really love that I don't think will sell, or I don't, I'm not that confident in it. Everything I've got on my slate is something that I think, could be massive.
And how did what was your sort of journey into this? So looking back to your teenage years, I suppose we always ask our guests kind of what were they like as teenagers and what were they up to then that maybe looking back maybe was different or similar or informed where you kind of went to. So give us a sense of what was your journey and what were you like as a teenager?
Well, I was a big music fan, and I was just in bands. That was it, really. That was what I was doing when I was a teenager. I played the drums and I just played music all the time. That's all I cared about, listening to music, playing music, going to see bands, being in bands.
So we know we're one of those guitar wents. We're one of those guitars.
So when Fender gave you 10 guitars, that's where
I was just into that, but I didn't take anything very seriously. Like most teenagers, I just wanted to have a good time all the time. As the drummer of Spinal Tap said.
Dial it up to 11.
All the time is what he said in the bar. But still I wanted to create and I wanted to do stuff with my friends that I didn't want to just drive cars off cliffs or whatever. I wanted to, I was interested in art and music and films, and I always had a notion that I wanted to sort of create something. Didn't really know what it was, but I did have a bit of a feeling of like, I want to do something, create something that I've done,
And how did that, and then just give us a sense, how did that sort of go from being a teenager playing drums, being total music fan, how did that end up being kind of a producer of documentaries in the way that you are now in films?
Yeah, it took a long time. I mean, I didn't start it until I was quite old. Really, I was a musician. I was in bands. I made records. I was the singer and the lyricist in a band, and I sold lots of records and I wrote the words. And then I became interested in writing. I tried to write a few scripts, made a few short films of scripts that I'd written because I was always interested in the writing side of it. So I started off being a writer, and then I just got involved with the production side, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I like sort of making the whole thing happen, and just organising it all. And I just got into it that way. So it was a creative process into a more, I suppose you would call, sort of business side of the industry.
But really, I suppose the little link there is almost that first crowdsourced documentary was all about music. And I think, you must have used some of your contacts from the music industry. So weirdly enough, had you not been that teenager that then got to there, you wouldn't have had those that would,
I used my contacts and I used my because it was about the independent music scene that I'd been part of, not that one, but a different one. And so, very much it was my experience of life that enabled me to make my first step in filmmaking, my previous life.
Yeah.
So there's that saying, isn't there, of, you've got to make films about things that you're really passionate about or obsessed with, right? Because it's hard enough to make a movie. So you need that sort of, that extra almost investment, right, to get it over the line.
And I'd say if you're going to write or direct or be creative, it's always best to start with something you know really well, whether it's a story from your own family or friends or something, the community you live in, what's around you. That's what you should start with, really, because that's what you're going to be good at. That's what you're going to have a more deep understanding of, and be able to express. You don't want to jump into some crazy idea about making people who sort of build rockets to fly to the moon if you don't know anything about it at all. Writers do that kind of thing, but it's always the best to start with stories that come from right where you are.
And from your sort of talking of where you are, as it were, if you had to take a time machine, we ask all our guests to take a time machine back to give themselves as teenagers one piece of advice. First of all, Hank, you do get to choose your method of transport of a time machine. So what type of a time machine would you like to travel in?
I'll definitely be a bicycle.
Bicycle. Okay, great.
Nice.
So in your time traveling bicycle, you're going to go back and
very hard for that.
And you're going to whisper something into teenage Hank's ear. What would your advice be to teenage yourself?
I'd just say relax. Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. Don't feel so anxious. Don't feel so self-conscious. Don't worry about stuff. It's going to be all right. That's what I think.
Great.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hank. This has been so wonderful to hear your wisdom and experience in sort of getting films off the ground and taking them all the way to the end, which is great. Yeah, and about subject matters that I love as well.
I really enjoyed it.
And good luck with the new project, Reel Britannia. We'll look out for that for sure.
Thanks a lot.
And do you guys check out Hank's other work where you can find it with the stuntmen film. It's called British Bulldogs.
Hollywood Bulldogs. It's called
Hollywood Bulldogs.
That's everywhere from Monday.
Which will be out already now for our listeners, so you'll be able to find that.
Yeah, and also online. Is Being Frank available?
Yeah, that is on Sky TV still. Elstree's on Sky. The other bits and pieces. Just look me up on IMDb. You'll see everything I've done.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Hank, for taking the time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
We'll see you both.
Cheers.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Great to talk to Hank and hear about his experience. What struck you about crowdfunding? What was your takeaways?
To be honest, I'm always just struck whenever I speak to producers that just sort of get things done. I just find that very exciting because a lot of us produce out of necessity. So for someone whose passion and drive is the getting things done side of things, it's just really, really inspiring, I think. And to have that many projects on the go, don't get me wrong, I have an arsenal. I am ready to go when someone says, "Do you have anything else?" I'm like, yes, I do have a list. But in terms of how many things can I emotionally invest in and write at the same time, it's probably only a couple. Whereas to have 10 things, albeit he said it there at various stages, is just very inspiring. But as far as crowdfunding goes, as you were saying, I don't know. My forays have been weak at best.
Well, I think Hank, because Hank really became, as far as I can understand it, the kind of go-to guy, for those projects because he had a really great strategy. And I mean, I took away that just some practical tips, the things he said about making your rewards sensibly priced and, because I suppose it's about volume and, a tenner, if you get, £1,010, that's a lot of money. So I thought that was really interesting. And that sense that to see a crowdsource not just as it's not charity, as he said. It is a kind of commercial proposition. It's well, what do you get for what? It's just a different way of doing it. I thought that was interesting, and I thought the idea that actually really crowdsourcing can give you freedom. Actually, a lot of freedom because you're not tied to what a sales agent or a particular production company wants you to do. It's it's your baby. You put it out there, and if you reach your target, you've bought your own freedom to make the thing you want to make.
100%. And I loved what he was saying about how the difference between financiers or film financiers that might give you money for your film versus crowdfunding is the crowdfunding audience wants something different. They want something unique. And I just think that's so special. That really just encapsulates the whole if your film is good and your concept is really strong, there is a way to get it made, and because often the reason for no is because your film is either not ready yet. This is a nice way of saying it's rubbish right now, or it's not. It's too dissimilar. It's too vague. It's not. It's not like anything else before it. And if that is your movie, and there's been loads of great films like that, and when films like that come out, they're smash hits. But if that is your film, you could crowdfund it, and that actually might be a really beneficial way of getting it made. But you've got to find a way to then obviously pitch that to the wider world.
Yeah. And I think I took from that, one of the reasons Hank walked away from that model to some degree was because it was such hard work. So I think whilst it's a great way for young creatives to get, if you need a relatively small budget and your ideas either wacky or zany or cool or have some sort of appeal, or as Hank said, hook, which we're trying to break these terms down a bit, but hook just means kind of something that people recognize as something they can get into. Maybe it's because they're already into that activity or the thing or whatever it might be. But just know it's hard work. It's not the easy option. And you've got a lot of dealing with people who want to invest or not invest, and you've got to be on it the whole time. And it really takes time and effort. So don't see this as the easy way out, guys. I think that's what I took away.
100%. And a lot of the crowdfunding things I've seen online, generally, the ones that I've seen do well have maybe like a real public cause. Do you know what I mean? Like that genuinely maybe a bettering society by being made. I think Hank has been so clever and good to find really interesting subject matters that, even hearing him speak about it, I love Star Wars. And if I knew about that crowdfunder, I'd be interested in chipping in for that, But then if you don't have that sort of thing with a pre-built audience where you've already got people that are passionate about Star Wars that might chip in, then it's really got to benefit the wider world. At least those are the ones I've seen do well, Or there was a case with there was a short film, I think it's called Little Favour, starring Michael Fassbender, and that got crowdfunded for like £100,000, well over its asking price, to make a 15-minute short film. And it's because it had Michael Fassbender in it, basically. Yeah, so all his fans chipped in, which is pretty good.
Yeah, which is the hook, because the hook can be an idea, it can be a star, it can be the topic or the issue, it can be the activity that it's about, or the cultural thing, the product, the Star Wars, or the those kind of things. But yeah, so it's not easy. You do need to go at it and work hard. But that's been the thing across all of our pods, is that none of this stuff is easy. You've got to go at it, and it's work. But hopefully it's enjoyable work, and I think a really cool way to get funding when you get started.
Yeah, well, you're being a salesperson, really, aren't you, James? It's the equivalent of like, I've got a radiator.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And I'm going to knock on some doors. Would you like to pre-buy this radiator? Because, buddy or pal, by the time I make this radiator, you're gonna love it. You're gonna be like, this is the best radiator, and it's Star Wars themed. And people are like, oh, it's Star Wars. It's almost
like inventors, that's how inventors used to get, an inventor would go, I have this crazy idea to do this thing. I'll put this, and everyone, and then sort of a few people would give him just enough money to get the lab going. And then occasionally it went big, and it's like, I have created electricity, or blown himself up or whatever.
I love that your creator was instinctively German.
It was, I don't know if it was. It was, there was great, I thought it was also that interesting thing that almost happens in any career sense, is when a hobby becomes a commercial thing. So he was talking about that, you start a crowdsourced project, it's something you really want to do. It's kind of like your hobby project. People put money in because they think, or because they're going to get a reward, and it's fairly low level, and it's all just fun and quite back of your bedroom type stuff. And then you make it and it's really good. And so suddenly then everyone's like, well, it's really great. What are you going to do then? So suddenly then people go, oh, we want to put it on these channels and we want to do this. And suddenly your bedroom project turns all commercially. And that there is the threshold that Hank's often been involved in, where someone brings him in to say, can you help me? Because actually I don't know how to deal with these release forms, and I need these permissions and clearances and help. Eek.
Well, it was nice to hear that, his film, when it did really well, and obviously the instinct was to make something very similar, and as you should, the moment you've built a piece of IP, being intellectual property, i.e. a concept that does well, you want to build on that and keep that going. And if that can sustain you whilst you do other projects that you also believe in that haven't already reached that level, then amazing, do it. But there is always that danger, isn't it? It's like of it becoming corporate-y, of it becoming this like big institutional product that is then hard to stay on top of, and that can be from the sort of documentation side, as you were talking about, like what on earth are all these forms, or it can be like okay, what do we do, but how can we do it again but actually make it fresh? And there's an issue with this in video games sometimes, where they sort of, when you sort of play game number 3 in the series, that it was almost written by like a committee rather than the first couple that were written by like the original writer,
and it's gone through that transition. And I think therefore, to try and avoid that, or actually for any young creative who's listening and thinking about doing something, that bit of advice that Hank said about give some form of contract, and a contract doesn't have to be a big legal document. It can just be an exchange of emails that says, this is what I would love you to do. Come and be in my set, in my movie, and bring a costume, and we'll do Saturday between 2 and 6 p.m. and I'll give you food. And they go, great, sounds great. That is a kind of contract. And almost if you can get into that sense that you're agreeing with every party what everyone's doing, that's actually really good practice for your later films. Because if you do that for the first sort of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shorts that you do, by the time you come to do things on a bigger scale, that's almost second nature. As opposed to at some point someone saying, guys, you have to kind of get permissions for this stuff, and going, whoa, what is that? Crazy talk.
Was ist das? Permissions.
So yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and we've got to have a question now, Dan. So what have we got?
We do. Let's have a look. I'm gonna look through the printed out emails. I'm gonna put my finger in a random place. Oh, we found one. We've got one, James.
Hit me. What do we got?
Well, thankfully, someone did actually ask about crowdfunding, so we can ask that on the crowdfunding episode. Although it's not very I think there's an opportunity here for us to go into more detail. It's not a very detailed question. No offense, Samuel. So, a question from Samuel, who's 16 and he's from Yorkshire. He says, "I've done a crowdfunder, but I can't get anyone from outside of my school to donate. What do I do?" We're becoming like the filmmaking agony aunts here, James, aren't we?
It's like agony aunt. It is like agony aunt. Well, I think let's take some lessons from. I mean, this is not my area of expertise, but take some lessons from what Hank told us, right? Yeah. Which is that sense of. I mean, depends what you're trying to crowdsource to begin with, and how much you're asking, and make your target realistic. That was a big point that came out. Don't ask too much. Make it low enough that it's really achievable, and also think about what is the hook for your audience. What is it about your particular project that you're trying to crowdsource that people can relate to and tap into and get excited about? And if the answer is there isn't really one because it's just exciting for you but might not be for lots of other people, maybe think about how you can change the project so that it is more appealing to a wider audience than just sort of your friends.
Or move school. And
go to another school and get everyone else.
Once you move school, then get people from that school and then get kicked out of that school and then go to another one. And then you've got 3 schools worth of kids.
I'd like to say we are not on this podcast saying that people should get kicked out of school just as a crowdsource funding tool.
Opinions expressed on this podcast are entirely of the individuals and not of Young Film Academy. Let's just make that perfectly clear. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, you've got to find a way to reach those other schools, those other communities, or those other groups of people. And being a part of communities online is also a thing. There used to be lots of places and different websites to hang out. Now it's like the sub communities within Twitter, or Instagram as well. But sort of, I mentioned Twitter because sort of Instagram feels like a content feed, whereas Twitter feels like a discussion feed. And there is genuine, like you can tweet at people, and if you like a bunch of their stuff, then they're going to see you. They're going to notice it. They'd have to have lots and lots of followers for them to not notice you liking a bunch of their stuff. And by lots and lots, I mean like so many millions that they've had to turn off all their notifications. Otherwise, if they've got like even maybe several 100,000, they probably don't have their notifications turned off for everything. So reach out, get in touch, and you can see people respond to hashtags and stuff like that. And then you can share your stuff there because you've made new online friends who are like real friends. You just, don't know what
and
they
I suppose,
like.
Samuel, final note is if your crowdsourcing campaign isn't successful in terms of hitting your target and getting what you want, don't take that as necessarily that you shouldn't be making this thing or doing this thing. Maybe it's difficult because maybe you need to change the project a bit. Maybe that's trying to tell you that. But at the same point, maybe it's just a project that you need to go and make and find a way to do.
100%.
So don't give up just because that particular funding stream isn't happening for you.
That is really good sound advice, James, because the reason we produce and direct, or the reason we produce and act, the reason we produce a lot of the time, especially when you're a young creative, is because you don't want to wait for anyone else's permission. You don't want to be pitching this and getting no. It's like, I am going to make this happen. So when there is a will, there is a way, and you will find a way. Like maybe you have to remove the rocket launch from page 3. Just to scale back the idea just a little bit, Samuel. But that's the kind of thing you want to be doing to work out what you can deliver and work out what's important about the story.
Yeah, totally. Well, crowdfunding. I think that, I feel I've learned a lot about crowdfunding. I'm quite tempted actually to give crowdfunding a go.
I'm not. I found it fascinating, but I'm like, oh man, I just know it's exhausting from my experiences. I probably still haven't gotten over them. But no, I think if you had the right team and you had all the right things in place, I think it's a really cool. I think if the reason you're hearing no from other people is because there's nothing like it and you all believe in the idea, then I think crowdfunding's the place. That was my takeaway, and I found that really interesting. And I'd be keen to do it in that instance. That was my thought. Superb. Anyway, email us your questions, podcast@youngfilmacademy.co.uk, and we will answer them on a future podcast. Probably a relevant one because, that way it's going to be helpful to the most amount of listeners. We'll see you soon.
Been a pleasure, Dan.
Been a pleasure. Ciao, ciao, James.